They had been running all day, but they couldn't stop. The moment you stop is the moment they catch you. So the two humans without names ran. The taller, older man dragging the young woman. "Hurry," he urged between heavy panting breaths. She had no air to reply, and half of her speed was actually him dragging her by the wrist. It was everything she had just to avoid falling. Her vision started blurring red as the sun set into the eastern sky behind the Cait's mountain range. In her hyper-exhausted state, she didn't see the tree branch. Her foot snagged, and she fell, hard and fast. The lightly forested area would help hide them from sight, but the canids had noses that could track you into the void itself. They weren't safe here. "Stupid girl, get up!" He dragged her to her feet roughly and tried to take off running again. She tried, but her muscles had had enough miles ago. She was at the end of her reserves. "I can't," she cried, pleading to whichever of the gods may be listening, hoping they might take mercy on a mere human and her only friend. "Gods damn it, girl! I'll not end up in the void for you. Move!" Her tears redoubled as she strained, begged her body to move. But nothing she could do in that moment would make her muscles unclench and work again. She turned her face to him, looking into his light brown eyes. "Please, please don't leave me. Please don't leave me alone in the dark." And his strong, weathered face softened as his mind flashed back to the moment they became friends years ago, when she was new to being enslaved, and he offered her words of comfort and a warm fire to sleep by. He knew he could not leave her. "Damn you, girl," he said, scooping her up. He was now grateful for all the times their master had starved them. She was quite light. He slung her over a shoulder and began running again as fast as he was able. Behind them, he could hear the howls of the canids far in the distance. But now that he heard them, it was only a matter of time. No human can outrun a shifter. They were doomed. He knew he should not have let her convince him. He never should have ran. Now they would both die. And for what? A measly taste of freedom. But then again, his life in chains hadn't been any better. Perhaps death was preferable to another 30 years of slavery before a miserable death and having your body thrown to the pigs. Maybe this run into the wild was to be the highlight of his life. The gods are evil and cruel to humans. I hate them and their precious shaman and shifters. To the void with all of them. Look, in that clearing, there's an evergreen bush. We can mask our scent. He stopped and looked in the direction she had pointed. And there, in the clearing, was a large, bushy evergreen plant. The only thing he knew of that could fool a shifter's nose. Maybe fate isn't so cruel, he mused, daring to hope. He darted towards the bush and threw her into it before wrestling into its thick leafy confines. The sun was nearly fully gone behind the mountains. In mere minutes, the land would be cast into the darkness of night. Maybe, here inside the bush, they could hide. It was their only hope, he reasoned. No man outruns a shifter. "What are we doing?" she whispered. "Hiding," he said, still panting for breath. "But they'll just follow our scent right to the clearing." "Fuck," he thought to himself. In his panic, that hadn't occurred to him. "Can you move?" He tried not to let the anger and frustration into his voice. "I think so now." She got to her knees from where she landed. "Scrub, then we'll keep going." She began grabbing handfuls of leaves and shredding them, before rubbing them all over herself. Of course, she knew that without proper processing, the oil was less likely to work. But this was all they had. After they smeared shredded leaves everywhere, they stuffed their pockets with them and fought out of the bushes. They began running again. She was still slowed down, but they only needed to get far enough away from that clearing to not be seen or heard from it. And they ran, and the distant howls were not so distant anymore. Their speed picked up as panic gripped them. A fate worse than death awaited them after capture. Beatings, being eaten alive, or raped to death. None of that sounded appealing. So despite their throats being dry as desert sand, and despite their legs burning like a branding iron, still, they fought for every inch as they charged into the night. Finally, another thicket, even more dense than the evergreen, appeared, and they hurriedly rushed into it. The howling grew closer, and they trembled in fear. The girl wished to hold her friend for comfort, but he didn't like it when she did that. He had been beaten every time their master saw them touching, so naturally it had begun to make him very uncomfortable in very short order. They shook in terror as the howling grew closer and closer. The sun was gone now, and with clouds covering the 3 moons, the world was cast into complete darkness. They were defenseless and effectively senseless, at least when compared to their pursuers. All they had was a fool's hope. A fool's hope that maybe, just maybe, they would evade capture, finally be free. The howling ceased then. He didn't know if that was good or bad. She thought maybe they had arrived at the clearing and were trying to pick up the trail. And that's when they heard a new noise. Screams. Screams of surprise and pain. The girl had to hold back a scream of her own and cover her mouth with her hands. Still, she hated how afraid she was. As the sounds of savagery echoed through the forest, both the humans' hearts raced. Only one thing could threaten canids in their own territory. RipJaws. The single most dangerous animal on Garden. The hunter that always catches you. The shadow that always sneaks up on you. The devourer of children and fierce warriors alike. They have long, sleek bodies, short, black fur, long, slender muzzles, sharp, serrated teeth. Their tails are long and hairless like a rat's, and they have both bone-attached and retractable claws, so they can chase you anywhere. They can see in pitch black. They hunt in packs, and their bite can tear through all but the very best armor like it was paper. It is said that RipJaws aren't animals at all, but demons from the void. It's said that the god Magnators brought shaman and shifters to this world to hunt them to extinction, because he found them so vile and repugnant. Whatever the truth was, the fact remains. RipJaws are the last thing you see before being eaten. At least, if you're human. The sounds died away, and the two humans cowered and shivered inside their bush, desperate to remain still and silent and hidden. Moments bled into minutes, minutes into an hour into 2. But their hearts had hardly slowed a beat. "Do you think they're gone?" The girl finally dared to speak. "How should I know?" the man said. "After all, what does a slave know about the wilds?" The girl was scared, and so, in her ignorance, she foolishly sought to relieve herself of her terror. "What will you do once we make it to a human village?" "I don't know," he grumbled. "Do you think they'll welcome us?" "I don't know." His frustration was mounting. "I think they will. We should have names, so they know what to call us." The man looked at her, unsure where all of this was coming from. But the idea about names caught him off guard. He remembered long ago, when he was but a child, someone had given him a name. But that was a time forgotten. His life had been nothing but a series of beatings and menial tasks and inadequate rotten meals. He remembered thinking that names were things for people and things that mattered. And he obviously did not matter. "Enough, girl," he said sadly. "I think we'll call you Beerus, and I'll be Bazelle." "Enough!" he roared, scaring the girl. She recoiled in frightened surprise, and tears began to well in her eyes. His anger echoed through the forest, and he instantly regretted his stupidity. But he was so angry, so tired, at his wit's end, that reason had completely left him. Why must you always insist on fantasizing? Why must you pretend the world isn't the bleak, worthless shithole that it is? Beerus roared. The girl, shocked and now scared equally of him as the danger of the night, recoiled from him as he yelled, scooting away unconsciously, tears running down her cheeks. Tense moments passed, and Beerus did not calm down. But at least he stopped shouting. He simply glared at her and waited for an answer. Bizel's eyes watered with sadness and fear. She felt small and betrayed and helpless. But she was also determined. So she wiped her eyes in preparation to answer. Her hands pressed tears away firmly. And when they fell, a black muzzle could be seen behind Beerus in the bushes. Her heart exploded with motion, even as all of her muscles coiled into knots. She was frozen with fear as she looked silently at the predator's serrated teeth, dripping bloody saliva. Be, she stammered in near silent whispers. Do not call me by that name. I don't have a name, he roared. And something in her broke. Behind you, she cried. And the RipJaw pounced, latching onto the back of Beerus's neck and shaking him violently. His screams of agony pierced Bizel's ears. She lost control of her bladder and soaked the ground beneath her. Blood sprayed her face as she watched her friend die in stunned panic. The RipJaw tore his head from his body in moments and began eating the flesh and muscle of the shoulders and back. Beerus's head was flung from the RipJaw's mouth and hit ground rolling, coming to a rest right beside Bizel. His eyes open, shocked, and meeting hers. She screamed. She screamed so loud it tore her throat. But she kept screaming. The RipJaw looked up from its meal and began to make a deep, resonant, growling sound, like a landslide echoing in the distance. Finally, her senses returned to her, and she shot to her feet and bolted. She had no idea where she was running. She couldn't see her hand in front of her face, but she knew if she stopped, she would die. The smell of blood and urine stung her nose as she sprinted through the dark forest. Every few steps, she would trip and fall, only to quickly regain her feet and begin running again. She couldn't hear the beast chasing her, and the sounds of the forest offered no more information than before. But in her mind, it was right on her tail, nipping at her heels. Every twig that scraped her bare foot, every jagged rock, was a RipJaw's teeth chomping at her tendons. If she hadn't already emptied her bladder, she would be pissing herself even now as she ran for her pathetic life. Then, she slammed face first into a tree. Bazelle awoke to the firm shake of a hand. Her head felt like it was on fire. She couldn't breathe through her nose. Hey, are you alive? A masculine but gentle voice asked her. It's not safe here. Get up. We have to go. And on pure instinct, she stood up as he pulled her, and in her disoriented stupor, blindly followed. What's your name? Name? My name? Yes, your name. How hard did you hit your head? Or are you one of those without a name? She stumbled along, mostly being pulled by the man. My name is Bazelle. Did you hit your head, Bazelle? He asked. I was running in the dark and... She trailed off. I understand, he said, and became silent. Unlike her, he moved gracefully and carefully, and when she took notice, she began trying to copy his movements on instinct, and his job of pulling her along became much easier. They passed a thick line of trees, and a small camp with a fire and a bedroll came into view. He walked into the camp and laid her down by the fire, before grabbing a water skin and putting it in her hands. The girl looked at it numbly. The newcomer looked at her confused, before making a drinking motion with his hand. Bazelle then understood and drank. What are you doing out here? It's not safe. I was running. Her sense began to flood back to her as the memory of last night gripped her. Her heart sped up, and more tears wet her cheeks. Beerus, a RipJaw. The man stopped what he was doing and turned to look at her, a look of dread on his face. Did you say RipJaw? He whispered, and Bazelle numbly nodded yes. We have to go. You should have said something sooner. Throw dirt on that fire, now, he said as he began hurriedly rolling up his bedroll and tying a collection of his personal belongings to it. Bazelle numbly complied and shoveled handfuls of dirt, topsoil, onto the fire. She was only half done when he gripped her wrist and began dragging her off into the forest. Who are you? My name is Jeff, he said in kind of a strange, high voice. Sorry, something in my throat. My name is Jeff. How did you find me? I was searching for breakfast. Now be quiet. We need to get out of here without being noticed. Bazelle complied, but in the back of her head she felt uneasy. like something wasn't quite right. Still, she let herself be led off into the woods and tried to remain silent. Her heart still raced at the remembered horrors of the previous night, and her tears flowed steadily at realizing her only friend was dead. She remembered his blood was all over her dress, and she suddenly wanted to rip it off. But she only had time to run for her life. It seemed like hours. And they kept going, until finally they came to a stream where they stopped for water. We have to keep going. Past this stream, another hour or two, and we'll be out of the woods. Then we run as fast as we can until we reach town. Ripjacks are more common out in the plains than in the forest, Jeff said, between deep gulps of water. You're from the common then? He nodded. Yeah, one of the free villages, if you can really call them that. I'm actually part of... He trailed off. Part of what? Bazelle asked. Never mind. Drink. We need to go. And there isn't any more water until town. Bazelle did as she was told, and drank until her stomach was so full of water that it hurt. When they both set off at a fast walk again, they moved through the woods like deer, as silent and quickly as possible. The woods were beginning to thin, and more light shone through the canopy. So, can I stay in the town? Of course. Yeah, you're human. We'll find you work and a place to sleep, he assured her in a matter-of-fact tone, which comforted her. No more shaman. No more beastmen. Just fellow humans. She felt like she might be going home for the first time in her life. They rounded a tree that was very large for its place so near the forest's edge. An open plains came into view. He stopped and tightened some straps holding his pack in place. Okay, like I said, RipJaws are more common out in the plains, and especially out here in the common. So, there are no shifter patrols to keep their numbers down. So once we get out there, we have to... Jeff suddenly went silent, as a rustle in the bush, a few hundred feet back, caught his eye. He squinted for a moment before his eyes went wide with terror. Run! He shouted and took off at a sprint. Shocked into action, Bazelle followed, but she dared to look back. Two RipJaws chased them, their muzzles bloody. They were limping slightly, each favoring a leg, but still they were gaining. Bazelle shrieked with fear and turned her head away, focusing on running as fast as she could. Her and Jeff broke into the light, and chest-high grass quickly wrapped around them. They ran as fast as they could without looking back. Despite her shorter stature, Bazelle overtook Jeff and focused only on moving forward. Jeff hastily tugged some straps, hoping to discard his pack. But it was too late. A RipJaw snapped at his ankle, severing his Achilles tendon, and he tumbled to the ground in a broken heap. The animals set upon him ruthlessly, tearing him apart with such haste that one might think it impossible had they not seen it. Sparing only a glance back, Bazelle cried out in terror, wailing in pure fear as she ran for her life. She reached up and wiped tears from her eyes, and that's when she saw it. A town, off in the distance. It was only 20, maybe 30 minutes of running away. She could make it. She glanced behind her and didn't see them following, but she didn't dare stop. Her fear drove her forward. She sprinted for not just her life, but her future. She would finally be free. She would finally have a life with meaning. She dreamed of everything waiting for her, if she could just make it to the dot on the horizon. Up ahead, she noticed what looked like an end to the tall grass, just barely visible. She got closer and closer to the grass's edge and the town. She broke through the edge of the tall grass, and a RipJaw stood in the wide open fields, waiting for her.